Hi, thank you for joining us. Today we have Jason Farrell with us, the Chief Customer Officer from Amplify Labs. Welcome. How are you doing today?
Doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing really well. It's a beautiful day here in Connecticut, and we're happy to spend some time with you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you, who you are, what you do, and how you became a Chief Customer Officer?
Sure, absolutely. I am the Chief Customer Officer for a firm called Amplify Labs. It started about 4 years ago. We are a software development and, by extension, staff augmentation firm that specializes in creating custom software solutions for our clients. Really help them excel at building digital products. So things like front and back end development, full stack. We do things as simple and straightforward as creating websites or apps, but really get excited about the custom back office software solutions for our clients that allows them to streamline their processes, communicate with other software, integrate with both internal and external software as well. So we do everything except AR and VR because it's a specialty. We have a partner for that, but we don't deal with legacy languages like COBOL. We have a partner for that, but everything else is pretty much fair game. As far as my role here, Chief Customer Officer at Amplify Labs, kind of a very strange pathway to get to this position. I started actually in the front office of financial services working as a derivatives trader for a number of years on Wall Street and did very well with that, working with a lot of large firms. Never worked at them. I always preferred the small, medium firms. They paid better. But working with a lot of firms you might have heard of, such as Goldman or Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, Deutsche Bank, etc. Left that part of business in about 10 years ago. As I mentioned, I did very well with it, but it changed considerably and wanted to see where I could kind of use that knowledge and wound up starting my own niche risk advisory consulting firm with a former boss and another gentleman who used to run fixed income for Royal Bank of Canada. Did very well with that. Our niche risk consulting business grew pretty tremendously over the next several years. And in 2017, we sold that practice, moved into my first chief customer officer role at a firm called Investments, which was a white label robo advisory service, and grew the business there considerably. We went from about one client, or I should say, we went from one client to a number of clients and really exploded that business. So we got bought out last year.
Awesome.
And last year is kind of looking again, where do I start? Do I continue in financial services? Do I do hybrid like financial services tech like I was doing, or do I move full tech? And saw the opportunity to Amplify Labs because we've been growing exponentially here since the beginning of 2019, at least doubling in size every year, and really seeing a need for addressing customer issues and taking care of the right side of business, doing it the right way and growing the right way. And what I mean by that, certainly not a knock on them, but kind of the opposite of the Walmart approach. And like I said, I would never knock Walmart. They're too big, they're too successful. But usually there's only one reason people go to Walmart, one reason only. And I'll give you a hint, it's not customer service or the shopping experience. It's because of price. Wanted to go to a firm that didn't compete on price, but more so quality and treating customers the right way. And that's kind of how I wound up here.
That's music to our ears. That's what we practice here too at Satrix Solutions. This is great. This is a great question for you. You know, you've started a couple of chief customer officer roles. So, what tips would you have for somebody in their first 100 days as a head of a customer success or customer experience?
Well, number one, you have to understand the company you're working for. You have to understand their ideals. You have to understand what their goals are. Secondly, you have to respect the people who work at the firm who've been there longer than you. And that was one of the first things I said I still remember my first meeting with people at Amplify was, look, this is my first day on the job or first week on the job. I have less experience than every single person I'm speaking to right now. Now we're going to grow this, so hopefully that changes very quickly. And it did as we added more people, but I need to rely on you guys to help me out. Understanding that people have been there longer than you, they know the ins and outs. And the example I always give is people talk about the CEO runs the company, and in a sense, the CEO does run the company. But at the largest organizations, you know who's really running the company is the executive assistant. They really have their finger more on the pulse of the business than the CEO. He's the leader, the CEO oversees things, but the executive assistant is the one that is really running the companies because that person's going into the nuts and bolts and such. So really
Hmm.
getting in there in the first 90 to 100 days and saying what makes us tick, how do we do things, how can we improve things, and how can we improve everybody else. in the process.
That's great. I love that. That couldn't be more true. And the companies I've worked for, the executive assistant is the person you go to if you want things done, right? They'll get it done in a snap and know who to talk to. Well, now that you've got your first 100 days covered, what is the main focus of your strategy currently and in the future?
So we've always been, and I certainly have always been a big fan of goal setting. And when I say goal setting, doing the best that you can is not a goal. You have to quantify it. You have to say, what is the best we can do? Well, this is a quantifier that we put on that. Being able to reverse engineer to that goal. So for instance, let's say that your goal is to sell, $10 million this year of a service. And I'm just throwing that number out there. And your average order is $100,000, and you figure that probably won't change much. Well, you got to figure out a way to get 100 clients. Well, in order to get 100 clients, you got to talk to 400 people because your closing ratio is 25%. And to talk to 400 people, you have to try and reach out to, 5,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
What does that break down to? Well, there's 52 days in the year. I'll give you two weeks vacation. 5,000 divided by 50 is 100 a week. Divided by 5 is 20 a day. So you have to break down goals into conceivable chunks. $10 million is way too big a number for most people. But 20 contacts a day, that's doable for people. Now, the end result's the same, but it's the perspective, right? So we have to make it where it's achievable, where the person is not overwhelmed. And by doing so, that's how you achieve your goals, is being able to break down those numbers the way I just did.
I love that. That makes so much sense. You're talking to a data guy right here, and that's how I look at all these things, especially with lead generation, right? How many people do I need to touch and how often to get the leads I need? With that,
Absolutely.
what are some of the pain points you have when it comes to doing what you do?
So the things I look with pain points, it's kind of like we were just discussing this in a meeting not too long ago, was pain points tend to be stuff that you can't control necessarily. So for instance, we're seeing a bit of a slowdown this year in spending on information technology, on development. So the pain points would be, well, what if we're not accomplishing our goals because our numbers are a bit off? What if we're not scheduling an appointment with 10% of people, it's 5% because things are down halfway. Well, then you have to be nimble. You have to be able to adjust on the fly. Well, if only half the number is coming through that you expect, it's only half of what you expected. Well, your pain point can turn into a positive because the data, as you said, you're a data guy, your numbers guy. Looking at it, what does that tell you? Well, let's double our workload. Let's double the people we touch. So the pain point kind of becomes a data point to say, what do we have to do to get this pain to go away? And contacting people, talking to people, making sure that clients are serviced, making sure prospects are attended to, and doing that more so, doing more of that touching, that makes those pain points go away and serve not as pain points, but data points that you can use to learn what you have to do.
Opportunities, right? I think it's an opportunity. That's a great way to look at that sort of thing. I'm going to shift gears a little bit because, no matter how hard you work, it's hard to get anything done without buy-in from the C-suite, the engineers, the products people, the salespeople. How do you work and collaborate with them and get them to buy in so everybody in the organization is on the same page?
Well, it's maybe an overused cliche, but rising tide lifts all ships. People buy into you because they like you. People buy into you because they see a vision. People also need to feel valued. And I've heard this saying before, and it's very true. There's never been somebody that's ever quit a job in their life. They quit a boss. And why they quit a boss? Well, people say, well, it's because they didn't quit the boss. They went because somebody offered them more money. And my response is because the boss didn't value them enough to go fight for them to get more money. That's why they left. And the whole thing with Amplify Labs, I hope with a lot of other places, and this is not just lip service, this is the God's honest truth, where we do have a flat structure where we encourage people to speak their minds. We encourage people to contribute because people want to be heard, people need to be heard, and people deserve to be heard. And if there's not that feeling of being wanted or being appreciated, people will leave in a heartbeat when something better comes along. So again, competing on and retaining on service, on the way we treat people and our clients, that's what we compete on. Because we've had people in the organization that have turned down slightly more money because they know of the environment we provide. the atmosphere of the work. And that's what we compete on, is providing that where people are collaborative and they learn a lot more than they would elsewhere. So just like people want to make themselves indispensable, we want to make our culture and our organization indispensable to them so they don't want to leave.
Exactly. The employee's experience is key, and it really does affect the customer's experience. Happy employees work harder, they do a better job at their job, and that reflects upon the satisfaction in your customers. That's
Absolutely.
fantastic. What do you see as big changes in the industry? There's a lot of AI, there's a lot of scaling going on right now. What do you think is the future of customer experience and success?
I think that the future, the people who are going to succeed, you mentioned AI, and of course we're involved in artificial intelligence, are the ones that are going to see things like AI, things like machine learning, tools like those, even though we don't do it, AR, VR, XR, they're going to see those things as tools, not as replacements. And what do I mean by that? I was reading an article the other day about how AI, especially like ChatGPT, that's some of the buzzwords right now, is giving university professors a fit because they can't possibly check and see if people did the work, or it would be too time consuming for them. And the things are so well written in a lot of cases, and we've done some experiments with that too. It's kind of funny to see, but at the same time, it's a tool. It's, there will always be, or should always be, a human involved in the process. Look at things like manufacturing. We don't have the guys like standing there usually hand welding those cars anymore. There's spot welders and such. They're done by machine, and they should be used as tools to take care of like maybe a big chunk even of the background process. Maybe you can utilize AI to and ChatGPT, for instance, to utilize them on 3/4 of an assignment, 80% of an assignment. But they are strictly tools. And the reason I cite those numbers is I remember I was at a family office event in New York several months ago. And the one question was, who here in this room has used AI or is familiar with AI? I was probably the only dev shop there, but I wasn't the only person who raised my hand, but my hand went up. And of course, being in the front, I got called on. And they asked what I thought of AI. I said, well, I think it's a great tool, but I think it's several years from really showing you what it can do, but there will always be human element. Well, you wouldn't have thought with some of the responses from people in the room that I insulted their child and told them they were ugly or something. I mean, that's how passionate people were about how wrong I was about AI.
Wow.
And I still remember the one woman said, well, it gets me done 80% of what I need to get done. And I said, well, that's fantastic. And I'm glad it's cut your workload by 80%. My father had triple bypass surgery several years ago. I thank God that the surgeon couldn't just get me 80% of the way, or get him 80% of the way there.
Yeah.
So it's used as a complement. It's not used as a replacement. So I think that's one of the pressing issues right now, is that people think of it as a total replacement, and it's not.
Yeah, definitely not at this point in time, and hopefully never, right? Because then we'll all be out of jobs.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
there's some scary implications with AI too. We won't go into that, but
Yeah. In fact, it's learning from itself with all this, it goes into this AI cycle. All right. Well, that's some great answers. I have a couple more questions before we let you go. Is there anything else you'd like to share about yourself, your company, or the industry? Just like to give you a chance to get on your soapbox and talk. I know you talked about what you guys did already, but is there something else you want to touch upon?
Sure. I think with us, the things that make us very different from a number of competitors in the field is always putting the client first. And again, this is not just saying like talking points or anything like that, but really doing what's best for the client, even walking away from business that could be there for the take. I'll give you a great example. We were on a call with an Italian medical device company, earlier in the year, February, I'm going to say. And this company wanted to come up with their own imaging software, body imaging software, which sounds great. They wanted it written from scratch. And we said, look, this is going to be very, very intensive. And they said they didn't care because they had some very large clients, especially the one client was very large, that it was worth it to them because it was the prestige of having the client. And my response was, well, I hope it's a really big client because this is not inexpensive. I mean, this is going to cost. And they said, we still want to see a deliverable. We want to see what your plan would be. So we present a plan, and the plan, without getting into specific numbers, was 7 figures.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it would cost. I mean, a lot of man hours with this, and their response was, well, our biggest clients only $250,000 a year to us. And I paused, and I fully expected them to say, so that doesn't make sense for us to move forward. But instead, they start asking closing questions. How quickly could you have this done? And I replied, well, I mean, you can see on the timeline here, it's what it would take. It would like 6 months or whatever the case might be. And they kept asking closing questions. So if we started today, how much would you need down? And I kind of stopped them there and I said, look, you can do whatever you like as you see fit with money. I personally don't like to spend $4 to get $1 back.
Yeah.
Unless I'm keep getting that $1 back.
Yeah.
So here's what I would suggest. We can do this basic stuff for you. Philips has been investing they've been investing billions of dollars for years in medical imaging. Because of that, Philips is more than happy to license software.
Yeah.
I'm more than happy to. They want to get costs back. They're more than happy that you can look at you can't look at their code, but you can go right in, you can integrate. More than happy to do it. And all you have to do is call them up, or I'll call them for you and say, look, I have a client here, really like you. They'll be on the phone with you that day, probably, maybe next day. And they couldn't believe, because I guess some other companies they spoke to just wanted to get the sale. Doing what's right by the client will always pay dividends. They've since referred people to us, and I don't feel bad for one instant not taking that business that we probably could have taken because we're doing right by the client. I think that's important, and I think the high touch approach is important as well. And what I mean by that is, coming from financial services, and I can name certain firms, Goldman Sachs, for instance, that have the attitude of, you come to us rather than us go to you, even for an hour and a half train ride. It's just a bit insulting, where it's just, we're so big, we just can't be bothered to come to you. It doesn't matter how big we get or how involved we get, how large of a client base that we get, how large our clients are. We're always happy to come to the client as need be, do as the client requests within reason as need be. And that, to me, I think is what sets us apart, is just doing right by the client and doing whatever it takes to make them successful.
I mean, you couldn't hear truer words from a chief customer officer, right? Like, I hope everybody watching this wrote that down, because that was fantastic. Great. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and your knowledge. Before we let you go, how can we learn more about you, follow your career? Do you have any socials or a website we could check you out on?
I do. I'm not a big social media fan, but I always say I do have a LinkedIn, which kind of sort of is social media. I don't know. Seems like it to me, right? So again, my name's Jason, Jason Farrell. It's like Will Ferrell, except with an A, Farrell. Website for us is www.amplifylabs.com, and that's Amplify with an I, AMPLIFI labs.com. And my email is simply my name with a period between my first and last, jason.farrell@amplifywithanilabs.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today, and it was a pleasure to have you.
Pleasure meeting you as well. Pleasure speaking, Ben, and enjoy the rest of your day. Looking forward to talking to you again in the near future.
Sounds great.